Namaskar dosto, I am Amandeep and I welcome you all to another video of ENG Glide. Today we shall discuss Roland Barthes' very important and seminal essay, The Death of the Author. This essay is important because it is a part of the syllabus at UG and PG level in different universities in India and abroad. This essay is seminal because it marks a considerable shift from structuralism towards post-structuralism. Traditional literary criticism believes that author plays a very significant role in the generation of the meaning of a text. But in this essay, Roland Barthes argues that it is not the author who controls the meaning. Rather, it is the reader who, through his or her reading, controls the meaning of a text. In order to understand how Roland Barthes builds his argument and establishes all this, let us start today's gliding. The Death of the Author, a 1967 essay by Roland Barthes. Roland Barthes is a famous French literary theorist, a philosopher, and a semiotician who shaped the fields of structuralism and post-structuralism both by analyzing how cultural science, popular media, and literature create meaning. Different things, how they come together and how they create meaning. Some of his works include The Eiffel Tower and Other Mythologies, Elements of Semiology, Empire of Science, Mythologies, The Russell of Language, SZ and Essay, Writing Degree Zero, and The Pleasure of the Text. Barthes starts his essay by quoting a passage from Balzac's novella or short story, Sersin. The passage describes a woman, but Barthes asks an important question here. Who is actually speaking these words? Is it the hero of the story? Is it Balzac the man? Is it Balzac the author? Or is it a general idea about women that exists in society? Barthes says that we cannot know for certain, we cannot know for sure. Because once words become part of a text, they no longer belong clearly to one voice. This example helps Barthes begin his argument that the author's identity should not be treated as the source of text meaning. Thus, there is always a problem. The problem of who narrates, the problem of who writes. Many possible speakers can be identified here in this line, but no single answer can be given. The aim of this essay overall is to shift control over the creation of meaning within a work or a text from the author or the artist to the audience, and in our case here, the reader. That the meaning of a work of art is created not by the author or the artist, but by the audience or the reader. Barthes begins that writing destroys the author's voice. Writing destroys the original voice of the author. He argues that writing is a special space where personal identity disappears. When an author writes something, the words become separate from the person who wrote them. Readers cannot directly hear the author's voice or know exactly what the author intended. And the result is the author's identity disappears in the text. And the text becomes independent of the writer. Author's identity disappears and the text becomes independent of the writer. The text starts to exist on its own. Writing begins when the author dies. Writing means text here. Writing begins when the author dies. He says that the author symbolically dies when the writing begins. But this is not the physical death of the author. It means that the author's authority over the meaning of the text comes to an end. The reader should focus on the text itself rather than on the author's life or his biography or his intentions. Barthes talks about storytelling in traditional societies. In traditional, storytellers were admired for their performance. He says that in many traditional societies, people who told stories were respected because they could narrate them well. They were valued for their skill, memory, and performance in storytelling. But they were not treated as creative geniuses. They were not treated as creative geniuses. They acted as mediators of stories. They acted as mediators of stories. It means that they were not praised as original creators or geniuses. Their role was simply to pass stories from one generation to another generation. This shows that the modern idea of the author as a unique and powerful individual, that author as a powerful individual, did not always exist. The modern idea of the author came very late. It came later. That's right, that it came later. According to Barthes, society later created the image of the author as a special figure whose life explains the meaning of a text. The author as a modern invention, Barthes says that the author is a product of modern society. He argues that the idea of the author became important during modern period only, during modern times only. Individualism increased the importance of the authors. It means that social movements like empiricism, like rationalism, like Reformation, all these movements encouraged people to value the individual. So, what was the result? The result was that authors began to be seen as great personalities whose lives and experiences shaped their works. And moreover, the capitalist ideology glorified the author, and critics often look for meaning in the author's life. Gradually, this also began. Critics often try to explain a given work of art by studying the author's biography, his beliefs, and his emotions. But Barthes believes that this approach is limiting. This approach is limiting because it reduces a text to a single interpretation. Any literary work or a literary work can have many meanings that go beyond what the author intended. So, looking for one meaning is not correct according to Barthes, because that one meaning generally critics try to find in author's life, right? Barthes then talks about modern linguistics and the death of the author. Modern linguistics challenges the authority of the author. He begins it historically, that modern linguistics challenges the authority of the author. He uses ideas from modern linguistics to support his theory. The theory says that language works according to its own system. Language works according to its own system. It means that language has its own rules and regulations and structures. People use language, but they do not completely control it. When a writer writes, meaning is produced through the system of language rather than through personal relations, personal intentions, or personal meanings alone. It means that meaning comes from language, not from the author alone. Meaning, where does meaning come from? Meaning comes from language and not from the author alone. He therefore says that it is language that speaks. It is language that speaks, not the author. Remember this. It is not the author who speaks. It is the language that speaks. The writer becomes only a user of language. This weakens the traditional belief that we are having, that the author is the sole source of meaning. It weakens this stand. It gives greater importance to the text and the reader instead of the author. By giving a historical account, Barth says that a historical account is that in which a language has been given greater importance than the author itself. The first example that he gives is of Stéphane Mallarmé, who writes that the language speaks and not the author. The second, he talks about Paul Valéry and the verbal nature of literature. Third, he talks about Marcel Proust and the separation of writer and the narrator. And then he talks about surrealism and the desacralization of the author. Let us try to understand all these four. First, Barthes refers to the French poet Stéphane Mallarmé as an important predecessor of this theory. Mallarmé believed that language has its own power and that literature should not be centered on the author's personal feelings or experiences. Should not, right? This literature, or sorry, language has its own power, and the literature should not be centered on the author's own experiences or his own feelings. According to him, when writing takes place, it is language that speaks. It is language that speaks when writing takes place. The writer becomes only a medium through which language expresses itself. This idea supports Barth's argument that the meaning of a text should not be controlled by the author. Next, when he talks about Valéry and the verbal nature of literature, he says that Valéry also helped weaken the traditional image of the author. Barthes argued that literature is essentially made up of words and language. Valéry also believed that a literary work should not be seen simply as a record of the author's thoughts or feelings. Instead, attention should be given to how language functions within the text. What is important is how language functions within a text. How language functions within a text. Barthes uses this model or this idea that was propounded by Valéry to show that literature is a linguistic activity rather than a personal confession of a writer. Then he talks about Marcel Proust. He praises Proust because he questioned the direct connection between a writer and the character or the narrator in a text. Proust did not present the narrator as simply the author speaking about his own life. Instead, the narrator becomes a separate literary figure. This makes it difficult to identify the author's real voice within the work. Right? That has to be. So, through Proust's example, Barthes tries to show that a literary text should not be interpreted as the author's autobiography. And the next historical account that Barthes gives is of Surrealism, the Surrealist movement. The Surrealist movement contributed to what Barthes calls the desacralization of the author. The desacralization of the author. Surrealist writers practiced what we call, there is a term like automatic writing. They practiced automatic writing, right? This automatic writing means a writing in which words were written quickly without conscious planning, writing as quickly as a word is coming to your mind. They believed that creativity could emerge from the unconscious mind rather than from deliberate authorial control. So the Surrealists also experimented with collective writing. This is again something that is with them, collective writing. Collective writing means when several people participated in creating a text. And these practices of the Surrealists weakened the idea of the author as the sole creator of the text and having some authority over the book. So, in simple terms, we can say that these writers, Mallarmé, Valéry, Proust, and the Surrealists, all these writers helped challenge the traditional authority of the author and prepared the way for Roland Barthes' idea of the death of the author. Barthes then talks about the removal of the author and how it transforms the text. This disappearance or the removal of the author changes how texts are read. He argues that removing the author is not simply a historical change. It completely changes our understanding of literature. Traditionally, people believe that the author existed before the book or the text and gave it meaning, just as a father gives life to a child. The author was seen as the source from which the text originated, but Barthes rejects this idea. He says that the author is no longer seen as the source of meaning. The author is seen as no longer the source of meaning. It means that when we read a text, we should not constantly look back to the author's life, his intentions, or his experiences. The author belongs to the past of the book. Therefore, the text should be treated as an independent creation, as an independent identity, whose meaning is not fixed by its creator, that is the author. Therefore, the traditional author book relationship is challenged. This makes a major shift. This challenge of the author book relationship, this makes a major shift from author centered criticism to text centered criticism, or the text centered reading. Next was talks about the modern scriptor. The modern scriptor is born at the same time as the text. Barthes introduces the idea of the modern scriptor to replace the traditional author. Unlike the old author, who was believed to exist before the text and was believed to create its meaning, this modern scriptor comes into existence only when the act of writing takes place. This modern scriptor, it means he's born at the same time as the text. This scriptor does not exist before the writing. It means that he does not express a personal truth or a private message. Instead, he works within the system of language. Writing has no fixed origin outside language. It believes this. Barthes believes that writing is not a process of recording reality or expressing the self. It is an act of arranging words or arranging incidents. It is like the arrangement that is made in a language. Language becomes the true source of the text. Therefore, the origin of a text is not the writer's personality, but language itself. This idea again or further weakens the authority of the author and prepares the way for the reader to play a significant role in the creation of the meaning. Right? The writer as a mixer of existing writing. That is, writers do not create completely original ideas. Barthes writes this: writers do not create completely original ideas. Every text is influenced by earlier texts and cultures. What does this mean? Barthes makes an argument that a writer is not a creator. Writer is not a creator who produces something entirely new. It's not like the invention of something. Instead, every writer draws upon ideas, stories, words, or cultural traditions that already exist. The task of a writer is to mix different writings. What he has to do is he has to mix different writings together and create new connections, create new combinations. In this way, writing is a combination of many existing voices. The writer's role, the writer's role is to arrange and combine these voices. So even when writers think they are expressing their own thoughts, their own ideas, they are actually using language and concepts inherited from society. Therefore, a text should not be seen as an expression of a single individual's originality, but as a meeting place, as a meeting place of many cultural influences. Barthes then talks about the scriptor and the immense dictionary. The modern scriptor does not write from personal emotions. He says that the modern scriptor does not write from his personal emotions. This scriptor does not carry personal passions, feelings, or impressions into the text. Instead, what happens? He draws from an immense dictionary. He draws from an immense dictionary of language and culture. He works with an enormous storehouse or a dictionary of words, symbols, and in cultural meanings which already exist. Every act of writing demands or depends rather on previous texts, and previous signs. Because language always refers to other words and meanings. What happens? This is what happens in language. We know this, how sociologists try to establish all these facts. Language always refers to other words and signs and other meanings. So there is no final or absolute meaning in a text. This is another idea that he developed. There is no absolute meaning in a text. Meaning is always postponed and never fully fixed. It is always postponed. It keeps shifting and expanding as readers make new connections and combinations. Thus, literature becomes an endless play of science rather than a direct expression of an author's inner self or his own feelings. Right? The removal of the author and the role of criticism. Bas then talks about these things. He argues that removing the author changes the whole process of literary criticism. It changes literary criticism. Searching for the author's intentions now becomes unnecessary. It is useless. Once the author is removed from literary interpretation, the attempt to discover the real meaning of the text becomes all futile. It is pointless. Traditional critics they tried to explain a work of art by studying the author's life, his beliefs, his intentions, his personal feelings, experiences, and everything like that. But the modern critic the, is thinks from a different angle. An author he believes that an author limits the possible meanings of a text. Barthes believes that this approach of attaching an author to a text imposes limits on the text because it assumes that there is only one correct meaning. When critics find the author behind a text, they believe that they have solved its mystery, and victory to the critic, he writes. So, our traditional criticism depends heavily on the author. Whatsoever our traditional criticism is, Barthes rejects this method and suggests that text should remain open. They should remain open to multiple interpretations rather than being confined to the author's intentions only. Then he talks about writing as a space of multiple meanings. Writing contains many meanings. Writing contains, Barthes writes this, writing contains many meanings rather than one fixed meaning. This fixed meaning is of the author. But he believes that text is not like a puzzle which has only one hidden answer. Instead, he says that it is a complex structure. It is a complex structure made up of many possible meanings or many possible interpretations. Therefore, readers should explore meanings rather than decode a secret meaning. The secret meaning means the meaning that was designed or the meaning that was given by the author. The reader should explore meanings. They should explore meanings, multiple meanings. It is the task of the reader. The task of the reader is not to uncover a secret meaning, a message that was left by the author, but to follow the different meanings that emerge from the text. So meaning is constantly created and dissolved. He writes, meaning is constantly created and it goes on dissolving as well. So there is nothing hidden beneath the text, waiting to be discovered. What does this mean? This means that writing continuously produces meanings. It continuously produces meanings and then allows them to change or disappear. It dissolves. Meaning gets produced and then it dissolves. Therefore, reading becomes an active process of exploration rather than a search for a final truth. A text should be experienced as a rich network of meanings, rather than a message that needs to be decoded, message of the author. It should not be read like this, that we have to decode the message of the author. A text should be experienced, it should be read as a rich network of meanings, and one should try to find those meanings there. The reader as the center of the meaning. Barthes then talks about the reader. A text is made up of multiple writings from different cultures. This is the fact that he has established. He has argued that a literary text is not created from a single idea or single voice. Instead, it is made up of many different writings. This is already established. Many different writings, many different cultural influences, and several earlier texts. And these writings interact through dialogue, parody, and contradiction. This is again important because this means that various elements in a text interact with one another in a different ways. Various elements in a text and various elements in different texts, like intertextuality, they interact with one another in different ways, sometimes supporting each other, sometimes conflicting each other, right? But their meanings are brought together by the reader. The reader becomes the center of the interpretation. Now, hitherto it was believed that it is the author who is in the center of a text, who is in the center of the interpretation. But because the meanings are brought together by the reader and not by the author, therefore, Barthes says that there is one place where all these different meanings come together. There is one place, and this place is the reader. It is the reader who connects various ideas. It is the reader who connects various references. It is the reader who makes different kinds of interpretations which are found in a text. Therefore, it is the reader who plays a much more important role than the author does in the creation of the meaning. So, Barthes uses an example of a Greek tragedy here, which I would like to mention here. In a Greek tragedy, where words often carry more than one meaning, different characters may understand a statement in different ways when the drama is being performed on the stage. But there is always one person, the reader or the audience, the one who can recognize all these meanings at the same time. Maybe the characters themselves may not be aware of those meanings. This shows that the meaning is completed by the reader rather than it is controlled by the author. Right? Barthes then talks about literature beyond final truth. We say that literature refuses to assign a secret or ultimate meaning to the text. Barthes argues that literature does not contain a single ultimate meaning. Rather, it promotes an anti-theological activity. This was a great statement. An anti-theological activity. Anti-theological because it rejects the idea of a final truth. This final truth like God. And if you are refusing the idea of God, it means in the similar way, if you are refusing the final meaning of a text, it is becoming a kind of anti-theological activity because it is refusing to fix a final meaning, allowing different readers to create different interpretations. In doing so, it challenges all forms of absolute authority. It challenges God and his hypostates, all his hypostates, reason, science, and law, which claim to provide definite and unquestionable truths. That is why he calls this kind of activity as anti-theological activity, right? Barthes then, towards the end of his essay, almost, he says that the birth of the reader and the death of the author. A text is made up of many writings drawn from different cultures. This is already established, right? In this final part of the essay, he argues that a text is not the product of a single authorial voice. We have already established. It is a collection of many writings, many ideas, many cultural influences that interact with one another. And these different voices come together in the reader. This is already established. And the unity of the text lies in its destination, not its origin. It means that the reader becomes the place where all various strands of meaning meet and make sense. It means that the unity of the text lies not in its origin. Origin means the author, but in its destination. Destination means the reader. So meaning is created by the reader rather than fixed by the author. Traditional literary criticism believed and focused mainly on the author and tried to discover the author's intention. But Roland Barthes rejects this approach because he says that it limits the possibilities of interpretation. He believes that readers should be free to create their own meanings from a text. Therefore, he says that the death of the author, for the death of the author, the birth of the reader must be at the cost of the death of the author. The birth of the reader must be at the cost of the death of the author. In simple words, it is only when the authority of the reader is removed that the reader can become the true creator of the meaning. Only when, remember this, when the authority of the author is removed from the text, it is only then that the reader can become the true creator of the meaning. The meaning of a text is created not by the author. It is not determined by the author. Rather, it is created by the reader. So that's all about the death of the author. For all types of study material, notes, and university types of questions and answers in the PDF format, you can explore our Telegram channel, where you will find the answers to all the questions which can be asked at university level. So that's all for the death of the author and the idea which Roland Barthes has presented in this essay. We shall meet in the next video. Till then, thank you. Thank you very much.